documentation was very difficult. We had to go back to the agency several times and say, show us where the assumptions are, show us what the values are, how did you bundle these technologies together? And basically, 60 days was not time enough to go through this entire document. So from our perspective, we think the TAR was optimistic in its conclusions. Both for the technology side, the cost and effectiveness. Now, I don't plan to really go into that at all today because I have done regulatory negotiations since the early 90s, and we have never won a cost-benefit analysis with the agencies. They never believe our numbers, we never believe theirs. So that's why when we got into the 17 to 25 regs, that was mostly a political discussion rather than a technical one. The modeling, very challenging to see what they did. We think NHTSA did a better job than EPA did, but again, you have two different agencies, two different models, two different conclusions, and somehow we have to get one national program out of that. And then consumer acceptance was a significant challenge, and it was simply not addressed adequately in the TAR. So while we agree that the standards are technically feasible, the challenge is actually developing and building the car that the customers want to buy. As I noted in that cloud slide, one of the major elements identified both in regulation and in the framework agreement is that consumer acceptance had to be a major consideration in the midterm evaluation. Of that 1,217-page document, they dedicated 22 pages to consumer acceptance, and half of that was references. Basically, they said it is difficult, if not impossible, to disentangle the effects of standards on vehicle sales from the effects of macroeconomic weather conditions on sales. In other words, they couldn't tell if customers were still going to buy these things, and if they didn't, what would be the effect on the economy. So while we agree it's not easy, it's absolutely essential because that's the big half of the equation. What I'd like to say is we basically built an SUV and put it on miles of the country. Technology is not the concern, making it affordable is. Data-driven analyses are necessary to determine the impact of regulations on vehicle price and consumer acceptance, and getting it wrong would put us all in great horrible shape in terms of sales loss, job loss, and missed environmental targets. So quickly here, fuel economy is only one priority among many. What we have found is that when gasoline was very high, very expensive, there was much higher ranking in fuel economy. But we're not seeing that so much anymore. It's still important. 46% of the customers say it's a purchase reason. But you can still see it's 26th among the ranking of other vehicle attributes. If you have a family, you have to have a large enough car to do it. I have 3 dogs. I will always have an SUV regardless of how much fuel costs. So there's other things that go into the customer's decision. And there's also the issue with technology development. What we're showing here is what NHTSA had assumed would be the technology pathways towards compliance in the 2012-16 final rule, and then assessment of real-world industry data on how that actually happened. So you can see from the first one, the 5-speed automatic transmission, greater than 5-speed, they didn't have that rated too high in NHTSA, but in the real world, it went way up. Dual clutch transmission, they thought that would be the savior. Fuel economy targets would be met with this technology. The reality is the technology hit the market in a bombed. Customers just didn't like it. And then with the non-hybrid CVT, they were moderate on what they thought we would need, but we're finding in the real world we need higher amounts. So what this says that so far the agencies have been not the best at predicting what consumers are going to accept and how the technologies will actually lead to compliance in the future. So some real world examples here. We went very aggressive through 2011 and 15 to downsize our engines. So the 2-liter GTI, very fuel efficient SUV, fantastic escape. Customers didn't want it. They still wanted the V6. So we had to upsize our engines, and going through looking at our competition, Audi and other manufacturers had gone through the same exercise. They over-downsized. They went for what was fuel efficient, it didn't have customer acceptance, they had to go backwards and re-upsize their engines. Another example is our MKZ hybrid. We offered the 2 vehicles side by side, the gasoline and the hybrid in the dealership, same MSRP on both vehicles, and we're only seeing a 30% take rate for the hybrid version. Now, there are some trade-offs with the hybrid in terms of performance and trunk space, but that's not ruthless driving, so people are still nervous with what they consider a new technology. And then the irony is, and this goes back to the payback and overall consumer acceptance, that when vehicles were inefficient, a little bit of gain was a huge cost savings in terms of fuel economy. But as you get out to the 40 to 45, 45 to 50 mile per gallon, an incremental advantage to pay back to the customer for that 5 mile per gallon fuel improvement is very minimal. And we're finding that most customers are, if they can just get to working back on a gallon of gasoline, that's really all they want. You know, doing it in 3/4 of a gallon is not as important. And the irony, though, is that as that value to the customer decreases with better fuel efficiency, the cost of delivering the fuel efficiency goes up significantly. So we're in a situation where the costs are going up for the more advanced technologies, and the customer is seeing less and less of a value to that improved fuel economy. And then, of course, there's the effect on the reduced market size. Economic models have shown that price increases result in lower levels of car sales. This can result in significant losses in jobs, shifts in employment. We are seeing that customers are holding on to the older cars longer, and retention of the older vehicles will have unintended influence on overall fleet consumption and may place in jeopardy the national goals for fuel consumption and greenhouse gas reduction. So I'm sorry that I'm showing the car study here. Just briefly, this was a report that's in the process of being updated. They look at sensitivity analysis of the cost of fuel economy, the savings from the fuel, net cost, but then the potential impact on employment. And this is something that EPA and NHTSA in their analysis said was too hard to do. Well, it is hard, but it has to be done. It has to be done well, and it has to be done right. So the key message is consumer acceptance is probably the most important element of a successful regulatory program, and it was sufficiently not addressed in the TAR. And then delivering advanced fuel-efficient technologies affordably in a manner that meets the customer's wants and needs is our greatest challenge. We can put out a very, very fuel-efficient car. We can't make the customer buy it. So that's what needs to be considered here. And that's why I really want to give this team the assignment, right? Because EPA dropped the ball. You know, they worked hard on it, but I think that there's a lot of work being done. A lot of work needs to be done. But we really need to have a better understanding of how customers accept, how they think through the technology, how they value fuel economy, and do we get to a tipping point where once the car is 50 miles per gallon, they really don't care to go to 55. We need to understand that better. But I want to stress that Ford remains committed to meeting the requirements and delivering our goals for CO2 reduction. We need stakeholders to understand the challenges associated with the stringency of the requirements, and I don't think there's any lack. I think there's a lack of understanding at this point. Then we need to have broader policy issues to be considered and how to ensure national targets are met. They're always been saying that forcing manufacturers to design more fuel-efficient cars is like making somebody diet by only allowing them to buy smaller clothes. You can't force customers to buy something they don't want or don't like, or it's not a fit for them. And then finally, moving beyond 2025 will require substantial effort to ensure market realities are aligned with the national targets. But I believe working together, going from the dirty industry, we can change the energy format in this country and meet our goals, and let's do it affordably. That's it.
Absolutely excellent. Thank you so much, Nancy. So I've been taking notes and learning a great deal. I've got a few questions, but why don't we start the conversation going, Jim?
Yes, I'd like to ask any of the panelists who want to deal with this what the arguments were about Ken Gillingham's questioning of whether consumers undervalue energy efficiency. To be on the record here, at the time of the first CAFE standards, I thought it was a very good argument because there was no good information and there was a market structure where the big three dominated the market. Now we have labeling that gives an accurate estimate of the cost of driving a car. We have the big three has lots of competition from other manufacturers around the world. We have advertisements that bring to the consumer's attention the fuel economy consequences, and so you don't have to even do multiplication. You just have to look at the label. You have to read to be able to know it. So the question, therefore, is, does anybody see a compelling reason why now we should believe that consumers undervalue fuel economy. Forgetting the empirical studies a moment, just is there a compelling conceptual reason why one would expect consumers to undervalue fuel economy now?
Sure, we'll start. Two comments. Thank you. That was a great question. The first is about the labels. So I've actually done research in the. I've administered an experiment essentially with the EPA labels and used the newest labels that I put up there on the slide. And then I created another label that actually broke down the costs by month, which is a much, it's essentially the cost of ownership on a monthly basis, which is how we tend to do our bills anyway, and we tend to think about costs. And found that there was absolutely no effect from a no label to the EPA label, but there was a huge effect from the no label to the total monthly cost of ownership. So I would argue actually that there's a problem, there's still a problem with the labels. We're not giving people the information in a way that they would like to see it.
But just a quick response. So to deal with that, and these responses have a different label.
That's
Right, okay.
fantastic implication, that's right. Yeah, I think that the key takeaway there is to refine the label in a way that it speaks to consumers. The other issue, I think, really, it comes back to the slide that was just shown about the fuel economy being ranked 26th. I don't know if we undervalue fuel economy. I actually do think that the empirical literature that's come out recently, I agree that those 3 studies are incredibly convincing. I don't know so much if there is an undervaluation as much as people don't value it as much as they value other things.
Well, that's an undervaluation. Yeah. So no undervaluation.
Yeah.
I agree with everything Sandy said. So suppose you're in a setting where the labels are corrected, right? So say we could correct the labels. You have to stretch a little. You have to stretch much further. Some arguments that people make that I have been mulling over, and I'm not going to say that I'm a complete supporter of these arguments, but I'm mulling them over. One is the bundling issue. That it's not really quite possible to just get a fuel economy improvement. You end up getting other things that you might not want at the same time. That cars come in bundles with a whole set of attributes, and that people associate fuel economy, higher fuel economy, with other attributes that they may or may not like. And so it's not really about the fuel economy, it's about other things, which makes this decision process a much more complicated one. It's not this simple investment in energy efficiency. That is an argument that I've mulled over. I haven't seen any empirical evidence to support that. But conceptually, I could see it as a possible argument worth exploring.
Can I just respond just quickly?
Yeah.
That's an argument that people may not get it perfect, but it may be an overvaluing or undervaluing if you have to have a bundle and there's competition in the automobile. It's not an argument for systematic underweighting, because, as I say, you can overweight with that.
Well,
but go on.
Unless that there is some correlation between the attributes that leads it to work in one direction. You'd have to believe that there's some correlation among the attributes, and that is the argument. The second is, and I think the second one falls more into the category that you were just mentioning, that it could be an undervaluation or overvaluation, but it's particularly would lead to less of a valuation at the lower levels of MPG, is the MPG illusion, and people may be familiar with this. There's a science article about it, in which the fuel savings you get from going 1 additional miles per gallon when you're up at 50 miles per gallon. So if you go from 50 to 51 miles per gallon, that's a heck of a lot smaller fuel savings than you get if you go from 10 to 11 miles per gallon, right? And so for people down at the lower end, they may not feel like, 10, 11, big deal, it's all about the same. That makes a much bigger difference than those who are at the higher end. So it obviously is working in different directions. But it may be particularly important in the category at the lower end. So that's another thing. I'd love to hear Nancy's thoughts.
Well, I think Professor Crowley would make the comment that they're not undervaluing, they're just valuing things better, right? When you go to the grocery store, you have 2 options of food. One has lower calories than the other, but you don't necessarily go for lower calorie food because the other one tastes better, right? So same with the consumers. And they also need to be doing things like I can personally, where I was looking at a large SUV, but the fuel economy was higher than I wanted. I had a long commute every day. So I went to a smaller SUV, better fuel economy, but then I loaded that thing up. So the fuel economy was not as good as it could have been for that footprint vehicle, because I wanted the heated leather seats, I wanted the mat system, you know, and all these things add weight and add load to the alternator, which decrease fuel economy. So again, it's the trade-offs the customers make. They may move from a larger vehicle to a smaller vehicle, but then they upload that vehicle. They may say, you know, fuel prices down the way they are, I can afford finally to get that F-150. So there's a lot of things that go into consumers, and we have been spending 113 years trying to understand what drives a consumer to buy a car, and we're still struggling with that.
Can I just add one thing? I put this up because I heard you discussing. I think a lot of these, and it's maybe your point, Jamie, related to the point that you made, a lot of these are really sort of cross-correlated. They really say the same thing. You know, fun to drive, road holding ability, handling, whereas this is the only one that has to do with the operating cost of the vehicle. If you also had things like uses less gas, you know, my guess is that you'd probably see that ranked higher. And so I think to some extent, maybe, where is that?
Affordable.
Oh, affordable to buy. Affordable to buy, and there's another one that basically said that.
Price, deal, offer, number 7.
Yeah, deal, price, affordable to buy. You know, there are about 3 or 4 different measures of the front seat. That's horrible. But still, I mean, that's where you spend your time in the car. I guess I'll point out that this alone doesn't really tell me that people are valuing fuel economy.
I'll also add that we've actually seen this image. If you ask somebody in the abstract, like if I were to ask you all right now how much you value fuel economy, you would probably rank it towards the top. It'd probably be your number 3 or number 4. If you were then to go to the dealer, well, I don't know, you guys are all a diverse group. If you were then to go to a dealership to buy a vehicle, and you walked out with your vehicle, and I were to ask you the same question, you would put it around number 26. This is what we've seen happen many times.
But I point out that none of those are arguments that there's an overvaluation. All this is saying people make trade-offs. And overvaluation is they're trading off in a way that if they were totally rational with complete information, they trade off differently. I haven't heard many arguments yet that they trade off differently, other than the bundling means that they could be too high, too low, and it's not perfect.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, a lot of other people ask.
Yes, just one last thing. A lot of this is buying a car. Of course, it's voodoo. You know, you buy it because you like it, you buy it the way it looks. So, you know, my wife bought a car that it's all gasoline car. It's not a hybrid. And it gets terrible fuel mileage, but she likes the looks of it. And it had a sign on it that says, in metal, blue efficiency. I don't know what that means at all. It doesn't mean anything, but it gives me an impression. I just think that people are making somewhat wise decisions.
Can I add just a little bit to that? When they were looking at automakers, when they were putting together the label for the fuel economy guide, one of the options they had was to actually have a grade for the fuel economy, A, B, C, D, E. Automakers hated that because what they were finding was that consumers would see that grade and think that that was the grade for the entire car and all of its attributes, not just the fuel economy. And so it definitely was switching buying patterns towards more efficient cars, but they were finding that it was seen inappropriately. People were viewing it too strongly. Misunderstood.
Well, just to that point, sorry, but the other problem with that too is you've got a large car and a small car in the same rating. So you may have a very efficient large car, but it's always going to have worse fuel economy than a small car. It's always going to be an E, even though it's a very good large car. So, okay.
Who had their hands up first? Everybody? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, just a quick question. As buying habits have changed more towards identification of the cars that you want over the internet, for example, does that change this whole thing? In other words, is it possible that, you know, through the internet you're able to get more information that's maybe not restricted to exactly the way that label looks on a car, and therefore possibly value it more highly?
We find that the buyers of the electrified products they come into the dealership knowing exactly what they want and why they want it, because they've done all the internet research. So yeah, the person who makes the decision to buy an electrified product has done the research, they know what they've done. Some people go in and they like the red car in the lot, and that's what they go home with. So it's changing. It is changing. We're seeing a much more educated consumer coming in with the internet. But it's changing slowly.
Who was?
If there's any other
Yeah, I can just,
comments?
the point I made before about in abstract versus when you actually walk up the floor was a recent Deloitte study. So it's recent in the age of internet and the ability to research ahead of time. I don't know how it's changed over time, however.
This is a quick question, especially for Professor.
There are no quick questions, but it's cool.
Indulge my ignorance, I'm here about DOE. Has there been any comparison in these cost-benefit analyses to the equivalent fuels tax or equivalent more actions to the MC tax?
So not obviously in the U.S. government analyses, but yes, in the academic literature, there are many comparisons. And generally, CAFE standards are found to be much more costly of an approach by an order of magnitude, but it varies very much depending on what study you're using for the compliance costs.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the internet on board in Washington, D.C. How big is the used car market? And whether fuel economy is any issue in the used car market?
So the question was, how large is the used car market
Yeah.
and do fuel economy standards affect the used car market? I mean, I'll quickly answer in that the Grunspect effect, or the idea is that if you raise new car prices, people hold on to old cars longer, which you also, Nancy also alluded to. So that's a factor immediately in which it has an effect. It also is going to affect the equilibrium pricing in the used car market in the sense that if you raise new car prices, that's going to mean that the demand for used cars is going to go up slightly, so you're going to actually affect the used car pricing slightly. Those prices will go up slightly as well. So there's going to be a ripple effect throughout. When you do care, when you're talking about environmental performance or environmental integrity, the important thing that people consider is how much longer those very old cars can stay on the road because you're making fewer new cars or more expensive new cars up front. And that's where it plays, I think, the strongest role. But the used car fleet is a larger, obviously a larger fraction than the very new car fleet. You want to add to that?
Again, with the advanced technology vehicles, electric products, we see more of a stronger correlation between fuel price and purchase of those vehicles in the used car market. So I think that the used car market customer, and I wish I had a source for this, is a little bit more sensitive to what their monthly price costs are going to be. So I think we do see more attention in that market for fuel economy.
I'd like to just agree with that point. Corroborate. Anecdotally, discussions with CarMax, they definitely will pay, all things being equal, more for a fuel-efficient model of the same car. I was told this on more than one occasion. And that means they'll charge more for it. That's the only one reason. It's not out of the goodness of their heart. There really is a preference, stronger preference. I don't know, stronger or weaker, but there's definitely a preference for these cars.
So I agree with all the points. I think they're fabulous. Just to add one more dimension, I've heard also anecdotally through CAR, which was a report that was presented here, that we've actually seen a much larger drop in the resale value of electric vehicles in particular in the last year. And the idea is that these policies are changing so rapidly that why would you go out and buy a used car from 2 years ago when you could go and buy a heavily discounted electric vehicle on the floor somewhere new?
But not just the policy, also the technology.
And the tech, right. Policy is encouraging the technology.
Well, I mean, the first Teslas were $95,000 with a resale of about 60. You know, a few years later, and you could go out and buy a new one for 66. So the price is coming down. So why would anyone pay 60? Mike?
Yeah, so,
I'm sorry. I think I promised this.
oh, go ahead. Well, it's a question for either of the professors here. So normally we talk about consumer acceptance and stuff like that, whereas as economists we sort of think in terms of consumer surplus, right? And so I'm curious whether some analyses have been done, what the consumer surplus might look like in, say, small cars versus large cars, in an unconstrained market, possibly an unconstrained carbon tax or something, but even forget that, versus the market we actually see, what the consumer surplus is here with the subsidies for the small cars and the effectively taxes on the large cars. What has happened to the consumer surplus between the two situations?
So I mean, I can quickly answer that. That's what Mark Jacobson's paper in the AHA Economic Policy attempts to do. A lot of assumptions have to be made in order to do that, because effectively you need to have a counterfactual world in which that did not have CAFE, which requires a lot of assumptions about what would have happened. You need a demand model that's estimated on parameters today, but you're starting to move well outside the parameter space that you can imagine today's world working in, because CAFE standards have been in place for a long time. So yes, that has been done. When I say actually the cost and benefits in that paper by Mark Jacobson show that the costs are very high. He also shows that the costs exceed the benefits quite dramatically. And that's probably the paper that goes the furthest in attempting to answer the question in the way that you've framed it, because it does really require a structural model with a full counterfactual. It's not easy to do though, and I think there's plenty of more room for work. One of the key aspects that's missing in that is the nature of innovation and how induced innovation has occurred in this market over the past 20 years with or without CAFE standards. When CAFE standards ramped up, how that changed the attributes of cars when there were flat CAFE standards, and then when they ramped up again. Those pieces of the puzzle, in a sense, are very, very important in my view, and they're not modeled at all in that paper, which lends itself to additional work. And people are working on this, but it's quite challenging.
Well, I understand your point, I believe, and I think it's a fair comment, but the resources to do the induced innovation are coming from somewhere, and they would have had an alternative product, would they not?
So that is the question. What is the opportunity cost that I raised? Yeah.
It's 4 o'clock, so I think basically, unless there's another burning question, please join me in thanking our phenomenal panel. So we have a coffee break till 4:30, and some wonderful concurrent sessions starting at 4:30 through 6:15.